Did you feel that? That giant crack in the Canadian TV business? That rattling of bones and gnashing of teeth? Yes, specialty brands are getting stolen faster than SUVs in Toronto. What's going on? Hold on to your remotes. We've got the guy with the answers on this episode of Brio TV, the podcast. Well, welcome to a bonus episode of Brio TV, the podcast. I'm TV critic Bill Brio, and in this episode, well, it's going to be of special interest to those in the TV industry in Canada. Whether you are a broadcast executive or pitch shows for a studio or production house or are the head of the CRTC, or maybe you simply saw the recent headlines and wondered, what the heck is going on in the Canadian TV industry? A story broke right after the Canadian Upfront week, and that was the week, many advertisers gather to see what the Canadian media companies have to offer. And the news broke right after that. There had been a raid on imported rights to some well-known American brand assets. For years, Warner Brothers Discovery have sold the rights to specialty brands such as Food Network and HGTV to Corus Media. Apparently, unbeknownst to Corus, rival Rogers swooped in and made their own deal with Warner's to be the new home of those brands in Canada starting next January. That seemed to catch Corus really by surprise, and the vice president and now co-chair of Corus, Troy Reeb, seemed to be very off guard. He was one of the main speakers at the Banff World Media Fest earlier this month, and he denounced Rogers for the sneak attack, likening their action to bullies in a schoolyard taking other kids' lunch money. That was followed by suggestions that Bell Media might also be in peril of losing territorial rights to some of their prized Discovery brands. So how did all this happen? And why now, all of a sudden, are the gloves suddenly off in the Canadian television industry? Can Corus survive in a media landscape where rivals who also run cable and telecom businesses seem to have all the leverage? All good questions. And who better to answer them than Daniel Eves? He was a guest here on the podcast 2 years ago, leading into a 2022 upfront. Then Senior Vice President of Broadcast Networks at Corus Entertainment, Eves used to be the guy who was at the table brokering deals with the American media giants. He stepped out of that red-hot frying pan about a year ago, so maybe he saw all of this coming. Here is my conversation with Daniel Eves, and if you are negotiating rights or just wondering where your favorite imported how-to or foodie shows are going to wind up, prepare to take notes. Thanks very much for doing this. I appreciate it and suggesting it. It's a great idea. I had just come off the upfronts covering them, and I talked to Troy Reeb about, Global, they're doing really well, your ratings are high. And then days later comes this news like a thunderstruck out of Banff that when I first heard it, I wasn't there, but that they had this sudden, it appears, transfer in terms of Canadian rights to these brands from Warner Brothers Discovery, I believe, from Corus, and as of next January to their rival Rogers. And this was something that you were during your career as a network executive very, very involved with, right?
Yeah. I spent most of my career, if not all of it, on the programming/foreign acquisition side of the business. So what I did my entire career right up until leaving Corus was work on negotiating deals with studios, channel partners, everything on the foreign side. And I say foreign, but as we know, it's 99% US for the most part. I've spent almost 20 years in that space, negotiating these kind of deals from major studios to channel partners to the joint ventures, all of that sort of arrangements that are in the marketplace.
Yeah, so a very important part of the business in Canada. And, for many, many years, specialty channels were a very steady, I don't want to say cash cow, but they were a great business, right?
Yeah. Special TV has been a fantastic business. I think, back when I started out and specialty was growing, it was the great combination of a subscription fee and an ad-based business. So you had this solid base of growing subscribers at that time, and then you got to layer in advertising on top of it. So the idea of a dual income business is what made it so profitable and successful over the years.
Yeah, no kidding. And just walk us through your path to network television. How did you come to be involved in this business?
So I actually started out at Alliance Atlantis. I think shortly after its merger, I started on Showcase Television working there. I actually started as a coordinator. I had come out of film school, so like many people who are into film, I assumed I would want to be a filmmaker and a writer or director or production, and everybody loves that sort of stuff. And then I did an internship at Showcase back in the day when it was run by Phyllis Yaffe and Laura Michael Tishin, and I suddenly realized this was a whole other area of the business where you got to buy shows and put them on and negotiate deals and then see what the ratings were, and did you pick something that someone was interested in and something people enjoyed. And so it was a whole new world that had opened up to me, and I realized how much I loved the idea of programming, finding programming, and then eventually, honestly, the business of programming overall. And that combination is where I started. So I started at Showcase. And I was there for a number of years, working on Showcase and history, helping them on the foreign acquisition side, on the programming side. And I was there through the launch of what was called at the time Showcase Action, Showcase Diva, all of those services on the drama side. And then the one move I made was a few years into that, I went over to CanWest. I was hired by Barb Williams to help run the specialty unit over there at CanWest when she took over running for Global. And from then on, I ended up working on the Global units, the specialty channels on Global. Was part of the acquisition of Alliance Atlantis, so I ended up going back to the same floor I left, one office over from where I left years before that. And then from then on CanWest, I continued growing the portfolio. So I would do acquisitions and programming for drama services, for National Geographic, for unscripted, for history. I was part of helping bring A&E into the marketplace, bringing in the branding of history and Lifetime. And then also working on HGTV and Food and working those brands as well. And so Daniel, over time...
Just let me stop you. Those are enormously successful brands, History and the HGTV, right? They were like 1 and 2 probably in terms of specialty.
Yeah, like I think it was a specialty channel always worked best when it had a great combination of Canadian produced product with an exceptionally relevant and strong foreign component. Because the one thing, the Canadian product would give a channel its identity. You'd bring in talent. It would work really well. But just economically, you could never make enough hours to really have a channel, have people come back to a channel repeatedly enough for it to sort of be really successful and sort of at the top of the rankings. And so that's why the US partners were really relevant in sort of making them the top channel. So you would have something like HGTV, and at that time you would have talent like Mike Holmes, which would be hugely relevant. Yeah. But at the same time, we would have what could be hundreds and hundreds of hours of product coming in from the US, like House Hunters National, that sort of product, that if you were trying to produce that yourself, it would be, it would be a US-based product, would be tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, which we wouldn't be able to afford or support in our market. So you'd have this great combination of really, really strong US product that came in frequently, that was fresh often, and then complemented with sort of the local flavor that makes this service work. And so History, at one point, when A&E was rebranded History, the official History from sort of the US, and we brought in a full deal of A&E product, aside what you thought, whether it fit History genre or not, which is something else we could talk about, because the removal of genre protection is kind of what led to what happened a week or two ago as a whole. But that combination of Pawn Stars and other product from A&E mixed with other Canadian product on the history side, pushed history right to that. At one point, it was the number one specialty channel in Canada. And that was after years of it being maybe outside the top 20. But HGTV has always been quite strong.
And Daniel, even more popular than the sports channels for a while, I think, right?
For a little while there, yeah. There was a peak time where between American Pickers and Pawn Stars and Swamp People, and it's always interesting, I find, specifically in the unscripted space, drama scripted gets a real high profile in terms of, and it should, in terms of its cultural relevancy and how people talk about it. But whenever you just step back and look straight ahead at the numbers, it's like, where are Canadians spending most of their time and what are some of the bigger products? You'd often see history and HGTV, and it would be product like Curse of Oak Island and shows like that just drove audiences week after week after week in a major way.
Also, as you mentioned, this great combination of American and Canadian, because if you liked American Pickers, you watched Canadian Pickers. If you like, it was dovetailed nicely. So if you were fascinated by these things, you had to have this channel. And also, in terms of the definition and these shows, is it history or not? It's never been a problem for me because I really, even on Pawn Stars, there's quite a bit of history content there with all the artifacts that are sourced and explained. It can't always just be the Hitler channel, or it would be the Hitler channel, right?
No, well, exactly. And I think that worked well for most consumers. I mean, that was part of it around the conversations around Let's Talk TV and genre protection was, people weren't abandoning history because Pawn Stars were on it. In fact, they loved that angle. And it gave us the opportunity, honestly, to bring more people and introduce them to some of the traditional history product. But if it was only that, then, it was a channel that people wouldn't ultimately watch. But we got to expose traditional history to more people while also entertaining people. And there was a lot of history in those shows as well. You could learn a lot. And I thought that it was a broad way to make history relevant to a lot of people who normally would see it as a channel they didn't want to touch. Plus, the bigger a channel is, as you know, back then, the more CPE there was, the more revenue there was, the more you could spend on Canadian production. So it was a win across the board for all brands. And in fact, one interesting thing from when I was there, we were one of the first channels worldwide to really embrace that type of unscripted being produced by US in the US History Channel. So they were making Pawn Stars, they were making Pickers, and they owned a number of their own channels at that time around the world. But those channels were very reluctant to put it on in some of the other countries. They were like, well, it's not really history. I don't know if we want to do it. When we were at CanWest, we really embraced it. We put it on, we made it. We were one of the first channels around the world to do that. And then they would use us as a sample to say, hey, look how well Canada is. You don't have to bury Pawn Stars at 2 a.m. and pretend it's not part of your channel. You can really integrate it. Look, here's another international country that's not the U.S. that is successfully using this content. And so they started to use us as an example of how to sort of grow history around the world, the success they were having in the U.S. already.
I remember being on a junket down to Vegas and talking to Chris Harrison and all those guys at Palm Stars, and they had like at one point a 6-year renewal, right? Can you imagine that? I don't think that's ever happened. Please make another 100 of these, and that was just how successful that brand of that show was for sure.
That was, it was huge. People loved it. They made tons of episodes. You're absolutely right, and that was sort of those channels had those kind of workhorse shows that maybe didn't have a profile in terms of people writing about it all the time. But in terms of an audience, whether it was House Hunters or Pawn Stars on either of those brands, Canadians were watching them all the time.
And it's all about casting, like Pawn Stars is just like Friends or Gilligan's Island or, any other show. It's who's on it, who's the cast, who's the skipper, who's Gilligan. And they just had the right people on those shows for sure. And the Canadian versions as well. People really liked and identified with the folks who were picking the antiques and wish they were them or wanted to get those bargains.
Yeah. And it's always sort of like they like to see what was the value going to be? People love value-based product. I mean, that was House Hunters and House Hunters International. What would this house ultimately, which house would they pick and what would they pay for it? Or in House Hunters International's case, it was about how much does it cost to live in this other country and what could I get for that kind of dollars and what could I get for that kind of value? So it was sort of the same idea as well.
You can live a little cheaper in Florida than you can in the GTA, that's for sure. We'll be back in a moment with media expert Daniel Eves. Well, time once again to speak with Emily Gagne from Hollywood Suite. Emily, what do you got for us this month?
Well, Bill, I've got some incredible series. I know that we're known for movies, but we actually have series, if you didn't know, and there's some great ones coming this month, including Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. Have you heard of this series, Bill?
Mr. Bates versus the Post Office?
Yes.
No, what's it about?
It's about the UK fight with the postal workers and the government, and Toby Jones stars in it. It's a really incredible true story. And if you know anything about it, I think you'll enjoy it. But if you don't know anything, it's just an interesting true story that I think is really going to captivate you.
So nothing to do with Norman Bates.
Norman Bates is not in it. No.
All right, good.
No.
Okay.
This is a different Bates.
Gotcha.
A little bit less killing,
Nice.
But still a lot of drama. And it's coming to us at the end of May 28th. There's going to be like a 2-night premiere, but you can also stream it if you're more of that kind of person.
All right. Well, another series? What else you got?
Yeah, Until I Kill You is our other big series right now, and it is a world exclusive, so you can't watch it anywhere else.
Oh.
And it's a true crime drama, so if you're into that, I think you're going to love it. I'm not going to tell you anymore because I don't want to spoil it in case you know the true story, but Until I Kill You, our viewers are loving it, and I think potential viewers will love it too.
Until I Kill You. Wow.
I know.
Worldwide exclusive on Hollywood Suite starting right now. Fantastic. All right. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Bill.
And we're back with Daniel Eves. So, this is working really well for like 15, 20 years. And then when I sometimes am able to peek at some numbers, it's a bit shocking how low the number of people are now watching specialty. And I can't blame folks. If you subscribe, say, to CTV comedy, you're actually just watching the Big Bang Theory rerun network now. It just seems the content is not, they stopped spending on content or I don't know. It just seemed to be, they've kept the lights on and people by habit have these things if they have cable. But I guess, Daniel, that there's so many cord cutters now that started to really change, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. The ratings are much lower in the linear space. So I think there's two ways to look at it. And we're always influenced by what happens in the U.S. So you can see in the U.S. a lot of the services there have stopped making original production. Not so much unscripted, but on the scripted side, you would know the days of USA Network and TNT and all the originals that they used to do and the strong dramas that came from that. And they're making none of that anymore. That doesn't mean that the company behind it, let's say USA Network, Universal Television, isn't producing drama. They're now just producing it for Peacock instead of their specialty services in the US. And so for us, we have to look at that in Canada and say, well, can you still access that content? So it's maybe not on that platform. It may not be on a linear space in a cable bundle, but the US are still producing content. It's just about how do you access this and what platform does it show up on? And so from a linear perspective, we found, and I've seen, you've seen, and Corus has talked about it publicly, the success of a product like Stack TV, where they essentially mirrored their linear world into a different platform outside cable, and it worked fantastically well for them, as they've said. And that's literally just about letting people start to access their content on whatever platform that they want to. So if you can still get to the platforms and where people are coming, you'll be okay. And if you can still access the US content, and that's where it comes down to, will the US provider come in directly? And if they come in directly, usually they won't sell or share the content. But if they're not, then you can start to build your product on multiple platforms as long as you continue to have access to a steady stream of foreign/US content to make that work.
It's a very complicated picture landscape, isn't it? I mean, in that 3 years ago, the streamers came charging across the border, and then everybody hit the wall at the same time, it seems, Netflix even. And now, in the course of it must make your head spin. Strategies change every 6 months. It's like we're all going to have to be fast channels now, or no, we're not all going to like here. You can now get a lot of these channels with ads for $6.99 instead of $16.99, and I as a consumer, it's like it makes your head spin. So TV is just a revolution, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you go back 10 years ago when I was doing this, and it would be meet with a studio, meet with a partner, renegotiate your deal. The rights were really simple. The rights were, I'm licensing this channel for a linear network. I'm going to pay you this much, and it's going to be this long. And that was the deal. And that was done. And they knew what they wanted to do, and they knew what they wanted to sell. And it was, didn't feel simple at the time, but at the time, looking back, it was simple. Mm-hmm. Now it's, it was, what is their own strategy coming from the US? Because as you just said, that was changing every 6 to 8 months. I would say 2 years ago, it looked like everybody in the US was going to come in directly, and that was just what was going to happen. And it was almost a near impossibility for the mid-tier Canadian broadcasting to survive, because if they all came in direct and they all pulled in their content, we were in trouble. And that felt like an inevitability maybe 2 years ago. And then, as suddenly some of them tried it and they had some success, but ultimately, they're feeling the cash crunch. Maybe licensing isn't so bad. Maybe it's market by market. So suddenly now I would say that's changed a little bit. It doesn't mean that they're completely not going to come direct, but they're exploring options. And this deal that we saw with Rogers and this shifting, and even Bell's announcement of an HBO deal about a year or so ago, shows that people are interested potentially in licensing. And I would say even maybe 12 to 18 months ago, that would almost seem like it wasn't even going to be a possibility. And they've already shifted their strategies. So when you're sitting down with them, the first question is, well, what is their strategy in this market? And then the second strategy is, well, what is our strategy in the Canadian market? What rights do we need? How long can we get them for? What will that look like? What will we use them? How will we monetize them? Do you want linear? Do you want linear plus on demand? Do you want free VOD? Do you want ads in it? Do you not want ads in it? All of that has to be negotiated in a deal. And then on top of all of that, how long will they license you those rights? Because if they don't know what their strategy is in long term, they may not be interested in licensing that deal for more than 24 months, let's say. And if it was only 24 months, how long can you rely on that deal if what you have is only 24 months long? So it is much more complex. In the last few years of what I was working on, I absolutely was in constant negotiation. There was no, in the past, it would have been, all right, that deal is done. Let's sit back and enjoy it for, X amount of years. That's great. And in current times, it's basically a constant negotiation. Once you're done, you start again. If you haven't started with that partner, you're on the other partner. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 going at the same time. Sometimes I would be still negotiating deals right up until the day before upfronts.
Wow.
And we would have a concept of, here's what the upfront looks like with the deal. Here's what it looks like without the deal. And you would do it. And most times it worked out positively. It worked out, but we would be constantly negotiating deals. And that's Amazing. Very different than what it used to be.
All right. Now, take us then to the events that have happened in the last week or two. The sense was that Corus did not see this coming. That the fact that their content that was on HGTV and other channels, food, could suddenly, the American part of that could go. That seemed to take them by surprise. Was that the case, do you think?
Yeah, so again, I just want to reiterate, so as people know, I'm not with Corus, and I've been on the outside for about a year or so. So Right. This is my own expert opinion on these things. I will say first, though, I was surprised how, and perhaps it's because of what I've worked on for all these years, how surprised a lot of the industry was just in general that this happened. I mean, if we go back to Let's Talk TV in 2014-15, that's when genre protection was eliminated, and at the behest of most of the broadcasters. It was supported by most of the broadcasters, including Corus at that time, that genre protection was limiting. And back then that made sense because specialty was still, streaming was small, specialty was sort of capping out. You were doing the most you could do with the genres you were in. You were in front of the CRTC arguing all the time about, is this your genre? Is this not your genre? I think Rogers felt boxed in, Bell felt boxed in, Shaw Media / Corus felt boxed in. And so everybody pushed for genre exclusivity to be removed so that they could then sort of go let the market determine where product went. And so, when you think about negotiating a deal with a channel partner before Let's Talk TV, if I sat down with a partner, yes, they would ask for more money. They always do. Yes, they would ask for everything they could ask for. We would negotiate back and we would get to a point, but you knew that the leverage on the Canadian side was that if, as an example, and it was, HGTV was a protected genre. So even if at the time it was Scripps, if they stepped away for whatever reason, they'd have trouble licensing their brand in the marketplace because we had complete ownership of that genre. I'm sure other brands could find ways to squeak in some of the shows, but there was this huge leverage point ultimately at the end of the day that you would say to Scripps at the time, you can't go anywhere. We have HGTV as a license. So yes, we'll negotiate. Yes, we'll increase the price. Here's where we think we should go. Here's what we would like in return. And you'd get there because they couldn't really do anything else for the most part. And when Let's Talk TV removed genre exclusivity, that was gone. So essentially every brand and every product became free market by the broadcaster's request.
Dan, just walk, when you say Let's Talk TV removed it, what did happen? How did
So that was when, Let's Talk TV was a much bigger, complex reevaluation of, the Canadian Broadcasting Act and rules and regulations around providers and what Canadian content we could run and what we couldn't run. And so it's wasn't just about what I'm talking about. It was a much broader change in regulation across the entire industry. And there were some fundamental changes that were made. And one of the changes was specialty channels used to have a license that gave you exclusivity in a genre. And so, history was a genre that was exclusively licensed to Alliance Atlantis at the beginning, and HGTV was a specific home and garden license that no one else could launch in the marketplace. And so in the context of this broader change in regulations, one of the changes was the removal of genre exclusivity. One of the effects of that is removing negotiating leverage on the Canadian side to lose content that you may have in place. And so the fact that something like this happened, it's more surprising that it sort of took this long to happen, because in every renewal and in every negotiation in a changing marketplace, there was always the possibility that whoever owned at this time Discovery Warner could move their content somewhere else where they couldn't before, or A&E could move their history because they own. I say A&E because that's the the broad company that owns History and Lifetime and other brands. They could move their content somewhere else where they couldn't before these regulation changes. And there have been renewals since then. But I think losing that leverage point really meant you had to lean into making sure the licensing fees were higher than they typically were. You lost a little leverage on what rights you could get or not get. So it really changed the fundamental conversation underneath renewing foreign content in the Canadian market. And it allowed for Bell or Rogers or Corus at any time to take away anybody else's output deal. It was that, if they paid enough and they negotiated. And at the end of the day, the studios are looking for what works best. And when I say studios or partners, I mean Discovery Warner or NBC Universal or Disney. They're looking what's best for them in the marketplace.
Daniel, do you think that in terms of from consumers' point of view, was the genre protection removal a bad idea? It does seem to me that people had a very clear idea of what history was, HGTV was, but now there's just a lot of miscellaneous channels, right? I think, and the big example in the States for years has always been, for me, the Learning Channel or the Learning Network, which is ridiculous. It used to be about education, and then it became about my 600-pound nephew. It was, nothing. You're not learning anything except don't eat everything you see. So do you think it was a bad idea that these protections were gone in terms of consumer value?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think from a consumer perspective, it still makes sense because ultimately, I mean, I guess it depends how you look at the industry. At the end of the day, the Learning Network changed to what it was because that's how they grew their business, and that's what more consumers wanted to see than what they were doing. And as you would recall, Bravo US, what that used to be, the arts and culture before it became what Bravo is now in the US, and the product that was available in Canada. The Housewives franchises were usually successful. Like consumers love them. They're not rejecting these franchises. Maybe there's some value in terms of, would you like to see more documentaries or product that is more educated in value? Yeah, and I think that's where you hope CBC, that's where you hope some of the government-funded channels come in and sort of produce content that may not necessarily be the most popular content, but it's good to ensure that it's out there for people to utilize as they see fit. But moving to genre protection in Canada isn't effectively bad for consumers. I mean, it allows content to flow to the best platform in the broadest way so most people can access it. So, from that perspective, I think consumers are going to be able to get access to more content in better platforms in more ways, and that's good for the consumer. What that does to the Canadian broadcasting industry, what that does to broadcasters, that's a little bit different, because I think at the time of removing genre protection, it was from a position of strength that the broadcasters supported that. And now with streaming being a primary way people consume content and the ability for the US to come in directly, the genre not having something that helped form and control that kind of and give that leverage back to the Canadian broadcasters has been a challenge.
It's a good example, Bravo, because it went from arts and entertainment to tabloid, really. It's tabloid TV. Yeah. We'll be right back with Daniel Eves after this short message. What's new this month on Paramount Plus? Plenty, as usual, topped by the Season 3 return of The Mayor of Kingstown. The tense drama stars Jeremy Renner as Mayor Mike McCluskey. This season, the Russian mob is after him. Good luck, Russian mob. Not even getting crushed by a snowplow could stop this guy Renner. The series was created by Canadian actor-musician Hugh Dillon, who returns as a podcast guest in June. Also this month on Paramount Plus, don't miss the documentary Cyndi Lauper, Let the Canary Sing. She was always way better than Madonna, I say. Plus, she sang the Pee-wee's Playhouse theme song. My goodness. Anyway, learn all about her meteoric rise to fame in the 1980s. I remember it well. Plus, for something really different, look out for My Son Jeffrey, The Dahmer Family Tapes. This documentary features recordings between serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer and his father, Lionel. Finally, Transformers Earth's Park. The original Season 2 premiere is coming up, and here's a chance we get to meet a new generation of Transformer robots, the first to be born on Earth. Weird Al Yankovic and Red Hot Chili Peppers bassist Flea are among the guest stars. And remember, there's a mountain of entertainment on Paramount Plus. Here he is again, Daniel Eves. Now, what will happen in January then? Rogers will have to call channels something where they're going to start showing HGTV programming, but do they buy the right to name their channel HGTV? Does Corus lose the right to call what's left of their Canadian shows HGTV? Do you know?
My understanding of what I've read publicly and would be that I would assume Rogers has bought the brand. Like you don't, and mostly that's also because of what they've said publicly, and also the likelihood of Discovery and Warner Brothers separating their brand and their content would seem, a bit backwards. So my guess would be you'd see HGTV launched in a different platform in a different way with the brand and the content. Clearly, the Canadian content won't get shifted over. Those the Canadian shows that people love, like Brian Balmer and the huge talent that's in Canada, that's not about this deal. That's deals that Corus has in place and shows that they commission themselves.
But Corus
so those would stay.
Corus will have to call those channels Baumler Vision, or
they probably could and get away with that. He is very popular. It may not be a bad idea. You may want to copyright that before you or get some credit for that idea. I mean, he's hugely successful, and a lot of the Canadian talent. In fact, I would say any other brand or broadcaster that had that switch and didn't have a roster of Canadian talent, because most don't have that level and that much talent available to them, would be in a much difficult position than Corus ultimately is. I mean, obviously they would prefer to keep HGTV and that content, but in another format, losing a brand without the roster of Canadian talent that they have, they'd be in more trouble. So they're very lucky from that perspective.
Yeah, people love those shows for sure. What about, there's a theory out there, maybe that was spawned in Banff, that Corus actually was quite aware that this could happen, and that given the challenges they've had financially, their stock price is very, very low. And there's all kinds of rumors about other people circling that they literally thought, well, without these expensive licensing deals, our company is more attractive to be bought or carved up or whatever it is. Do you think there's anything to them being kind of just crafty about what is happening here?
There's probably, you can see how both of those rumors can be true, that they were that either they were blindsided or that they planned it. But either way, the reality is, HGTV brand and product, even in a linear environment that is shrinking, is a profitable, valuable brand and content play to have. And so my guess would be that I'm not sure this would make them more attractive, because ultimately when you're trying to buy Corus, I would imagine people would look into it when people do their due diligence. And one of the first things people would look for in a due diligence is how long are your deals for? Right. Because sometimes the longer the better. Now, if it's a bad deal, yes, if there were bad deals, you'd kind of want to be able to carve the fat of bad deals that weren't great or not profitable or not attractive brands or things that haven't worked. And you'd probably want to move those off your books and step away from them. But I think you would ultimately want to have the strongest brands with profitability built into your business if you were trying to sell it. So my guess is that rumor probably wouldn't necessarily be true, because the Discovery Warner content, Food Network, HGTV are very profitable, very broad, strong consumer brands that are still relevant. They may be less relevant than they were 10 years ago, but they're certainly still carry quite a bit of relevancy today.
The folks at Corus, Troy Reeb and Doug, I guess, they seem to be pointing the finger at the government for allowing companies that are delivery, that have cable, that have satellite companies, Rogers and Bell, to also own content networks, TV shows. Once upon a time, they weren't able to do everything. But at one point, everything was moving to make the Canadian companies bigger, I guess, so they could survive. Except Corus didn't have a delivery service, right? Do you think, we're going back historically here to when that all happened, and I can't even put my finger on it, but is that really part of the problem here for Corus, is that they just aren't as big as Bell and Rogers?
That might be a piece of it. I certainly wouldn't rule that out, just in terms of probably financial ability to be able to compete. Because, these are open market deals. There's no, it's frustrating, but other deals have switched hands. If you recall, a number of years ago, it wasn't branded the Disney Channel, but the Disney content deal was with on Family Channel at the time, and Corus eventually negotiated a new deal with Disney and launched the Disney Channel in Canada. And I can't remember how many years ago that was now, but that would have been pre merger with Shaw Media. But that was an example of a free market deal that was out in the place, and Corus was willing, obviously at that time, to pay more to launch the brand, and Disney decided they were the partner they wanted, and this is very similar as well. And so Bell and Rogers may be, may have some a bit more financial wherewithal to put some more dollars behind a deal, but that's kind of the free market. That's what the regulation changes allowed, and that everybody said was okay to do at the time. I don't think people predicted that, advertising would get weaker. Maybe they wouldn't necessarily have the same financial ability to compete in that space when all of those regulations changed. Ultimately, I think the bigger problem isn't necessarily Rogers or Bell. The one thing I do like about all these deals is they're still licensing to a Canadian company, right? Like, I think there's a worst case scenario of this where, at least, it's a worst case scenario depending on how you feel about the Canadian broadcast industry. There's a worst case scenario where everybody comes direct. They don't license to Bell, they don't license to Rogers, and they don't license to Corus. They just don't license, and they're in the marketplace. In which case, then, that's when trying to get the U.S. companies to pay for production and have a CPE makes the most sense, because that's the only way Canadian production will get made. But as long as they're continuing to license through a Canadian company, it allows, I think, someone to, put a real eye to what kind of Canadian content we're making and how to spend it, and support news. News is hugely important in this market, I believe, and having the CPE go toward it, the regulated expenditures, has been a big reason why. The CPE overall, the idea of regulated expenditure, is the reason why we've had the Canadian shows we have and the news that we have. And the regulation changes have ultimately allowed the U.S. studios and the U.S. companies to come into our market in a very unregulated way, even with what they've added on recently. And that has undermined all of this. If that hadn't happened, maybe Corus would be in a better financial position. Maybe they would have been able to compete with Rogers. Rogers and Bell can look like the big bad guys in this, but ultimately, I think it's stepping by and saying these are still all Canadian companies, and it's really important that Canadian companies, I think, still play a role in entertainment and news in this marketplace. And you're only going to be able to do that if they can make money off entertainment. Right. And you're only going to be able to do that if they can license U.S. content. Because the reality is, and I certainly can't speak to exact numbers, but to produce a Canadian show, even an unscripted show, depending at the caliber that Canadians expect them to be, can sometimes be 10, 50 times what I might pay for a per hour U.S. acquisition.
Wow.
Like, it's just not even
10 or 50 times.
There was a time where it was even bigger than that. The U.S. has just gone up because we've tried to maintain.
Right.
All of the U.S. deals have gone up. They all cost more than they used to, for the most part, because now they have the leverage point to come in direct. They're like, okay, if you don't license with us, we can at least entertain coming in directly. So that leverage point going to the U.S. has been one of the bigger undermining factors in trying to negotiate rights in this marketplace.
That's incredible. And it's just very precarious on a lot of levels. Where do you see now? What about Bell and Discovery? Explain that one to me. That's also a deal that looks like will be going elsewhere, right?
Yeah, I believe that's the case. I believe that's a similar deal where that has moved as well. I think that the shocking part for both Corus and Bell is that those channels weren't just license agreements; they were joint ventures, which is a little bit different than just a straight licensing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that those deals can't move, because they obviously can. And I think that's where you would have read, and we've all read recently, how Bell talked about taking different legal directions to ensure that maybe that doesn't happen, because in a JV, just generally speaking, sometimes you have anti-competitive language in your joint venture agreement that might prevent somebody. But whether that's true or whether that's out, if you step back and look at Bell, Crave, which is a great service, most of that service really comes from a great portion of it. I wouldn't say most of it, from HBO and HBO Max. Like, that content drives Crave. And I say that mostly because we know it drives Max, so it's going to drive Crave. And most of their content, their big content, is HBO and HBO Max. It's a huge deal for them. That's owned by Discovery Warners. So again, in my speculation, how much will Bell want to, without some sort of regulatory support, want to upset Discovery and Warner over this other component of the deal if in 3 years they're going to, and I'm just guessing at the timeline,
Right.
but say in 3 years they're back at the table renewing HBO and HBO Max with Discovery Warner, you're not going to want that relationship to be so negative and so toxic that they're looking at other partners or coming direct. Because I think without an HBO Max, or some other major US partner in Crave won't be a successful product in the marketplace, which would be bad for Bell, but it would be bad for all Canadians. Again, it's the one Canadian streaming service that's quite big.
Yeah.
But as they work through whatever they need to work through with Discovery Warner around the Discovery Channel, they do have other relationships with that company,
Right.
and really important relationships with that company. And again, most of the leverage still lands because of regulation changes over the years, lands with the U.S. partners, with the U.S. companies, more so than it does anywhere else.
We'll be back in a moment with media expert Daniel Eves. What's new this month on Super Channel? Well, one brand new series is To Kill a Dictator, new to Super Channel Fuse. The first episode looks at Fidel Castro. Other episodes deal with Hitler, Stalin, Kim Il-sung, El Jefe, and Saddam Hussein. Believe me, you won't find any of these guys on When Calls the Heart. They're on Super Channel Fuse, and it's a short fuse at that. Looking for romance? Well, that's over on Super Channel Heart and Home. Finding Love in St. Lucia stars Brooke Burrett and Philip Boyd as bird lovers hoping to goose each other. Also new is Lost in Love, about two tourists who lose their luggage in Turkey. Not a great place to be stranded without ID unless you're a dictator. Point is, this month and every month, there's something for everyone on Super Channel, which offers viewers exceptional entertainment value, uncut and commercial-free, with 4 diverse channels: Super Channel Fuse, Heart and Home, Vault, and Gen X TV Canada. Plus, access to Super Channel On Demand, available via most cable providers, as well as streaming live and on demand with Amazon Prime Video channels, Apple TV Plus, and Fubo. And back with the show. When you look at Crave, which is a very robust service, I think Bell says it's number 4 in terms of streaming in Canada, behind, I guess, Netflix, maybe Amazon and Disney. I'm not sure, but yeah, then there's Crave. But if you're a consumer, that used to mean HBO, Stars, and what was the other one? Showtime. Now Paramount's taken their Showtime, and Stars has gone out, it's just HBO really, plus Canadian and other deals. So if they were to lose HBO, like you said, wow, that would be sobering for Bell for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be I think that's their HGTV Food Network sort of thing, where it's a really important part of their business. For Crave. And I mean, that's why they're mirroring Max to some degree in the US, because they have a lot of the same product with HBO product and HBO Max. And if they were to lose that would be huge. And there's nothing, with regulations changed, with genre protection gone, there's nothing that says Warner Brothers Discovery can't decide to license it elsewhere or come in on their own, because there is nothing that really blocks them from doing either of those things. And so, I'm sure Bell was as shocked as Corus about what happened, but fundamentally, they have to think about their future Crave and their relationship with those partners, unless there's some other regulation that comes in that helps the Canadian broadcasters in their negotiations with studios. But at the moment, there isn't. And so the studios have the ability to move their content and brands to whoever in the Canadian market wants it, which is still a preference for me. The fact that anybody in Canada is still licensing it is a good thing,
right?
I believe. But the ability to come direct is only held back right now by the U.S. need for cash. So, as they try to grow their streaming services, they look at what it would cost to launch it in Canada. They look at what the license fees are being paid by the broadcasters. And maybe not 2 years ago, they weren't leaning this way. Right now, they're thinking, okay, it's better to get the dollars in, take the cash, and do that.
So
that's just today. That could change back in a heartbeat.
That's true, but it's a good thing that the U.S. streaming giants are in the red, right?
Yes.
Otherwise,
bizarrely,
we'd be all screwed.
Yeah, if they had been more successful, they would have moved quicker, and Max would probably be in our marketplace already. And yes, you could sort of regulate them to put money into the Canadian production industry, but it's not quite the same. I think there's real value in having even a behemoth like Bell and Rogers, having them relevant. And to be honest, the upside, which sounds weird because I haven't worked for Rogers or Bell, of having a bigger, stronger company is that they do have the financial wherewithal to really push back at a Warner's or to some degree on the bigger deals and maybe make them happen in this marketplace in absence of a regulatory help. And maybe not have those companies come direct as a whole.
But boy, it's a tricky business. We've seen, you mentioned news earlier, like Corus just days ago announced cuts to their news divisions in different parts of the country, having boasted about having moved forward in terms of digital platforms for markets and news. They were trying to expand. And now, they're having to cut back. So that's where when things start to go wrong, that's where the money goes from, I guess, in terms of.
Yeah, it's a country. And I will say, having worked there and knowing Troy, which I do well, the global news team is a fantastic team, and they've done a great job changing and growing within this changing environment. But fundamentally, it's a very complicated world, but I can go back to maybe 10 years ago. It was actually quite simple then when the regulations were in place. As much as we probably found some negatives and some positive regulations, it was we licensed the U.S. content, and they made a lot of money off of the U.S. content. Like, that's just the reality. They made the margin on a conventional show, the margin on a specialty channel, the margin on some of these things were gigantic. And that allowed companies to take all that, allowed and was required, which is important, to then go spend that money on robust news services, Canadian production. And that actually, worked really, really well, to be honest, because we licensed U.S. content. They made a ton of money off it. The regulations ensured that money was spent in the right way. There was some positives, some negatives. You can certainly nitpick in a bunch of areas. But compared to where it is now, and the U.S. either launching their own, like a Disney Plus or a Paramount Plus, coming into the marketplace, not up until recently having a real regulation on what they're doing with their revenue, how that revenue is being handled in the marketplace, is starting to undermine news and broadcasting and all the things that broadcasters used to do. And so, yeah, there's got to be more transformative regulation changes, because the old system actually, in many ways, worked very well for that. But as long as revenues on the broadcasting side keep getting depleted, or U.S. just doesn't license at all, news organizations are going to get hit a lot. And so will production. It will all get hit for the most part, but news in particular, because there isn't a production company out there saying, okay, if I can't go to Corus and get a production, make sure Netflix and Disney Plus gives me the money to greenlight Canadian CanCon. But what's news going to do, right? Like, they're trying to get some more money their way, but we were fundamentally financed by the profitability of licensing U.S. content. I mean, that's where basically all of the regulations were supported by the profitability of Canadian companies licensing U.S. content. That was just the reality of what it was. And it's not what it is, and it's not what it's going to be anymore. But we need a better way to figure out how to sustain, take advantage of. Consumers still love entertainment. That's not changed.
Right,
People are consuming hours of content. They love, there's still hit dramas, hit comedies, and whether it's a subscriber hit or an ad-based hit, or products like free VOD that's in the market where you can watch advertising, and it's a channel just dedicated, like, Pluto is doing very well, I believe, in this marketplace. And so consumers are actually watching, maybe in different places, maybe a little more divided, but it's still shocking how much they're watching the same stuff. NCIS is a hit, and it doesn't matter what platform it's on, whether it's on demand, whether it's on conventional. They're just moving into different places to watch them. They're still all watching. So there's still a ton of potential for revenue to be generated from consumers watching content. The question is, how is that revenue being generated, being put back into the system to support what we know as a nation we need, whether it's cultural content, whether it's news content? And that's not quite there yet. And I don't think we're moving fast enough to do that.
And even we haven't even touched on sports. That would be another hour. But you imagine, right now Bell has this giant NFL deal and Rogers has this giant hockey deal. But, those deals, as you know, they have deadlines and finite end dates, and then they got to be renegotiated. And there's plenty of talk of how the NFL isn't just going to be CBS and Fox. It's going to be Amazon and Disney. It's going to be spread out over so many different. Same with the NHL, right? So it's going to just be more fragmented. If you're a hockey fan, you might have to subscribe to 3 or 4 things to see every Leaf game, right?
Yeah, and I'll be upfront. Sports was never my forte in terms of rights. As going through Shaw, Corus, and Can West, I didn't do a lot of sports deals, if any. But the same principle applies. If a few principles apply, it could be harder for consumers to find the content in the right way that they want to. The sports revenue that it generates doesn't necessarily go into the Canadian marketplace in the way that it should, and fundamentally, if the broadcasters sort of get shut out, if eventually Corus isn't around and Bell and Rogers don't get renewals on deals that they have, and everybody's coming direct, you just lose more and more control over regulation as well. Which I know sounds from a consumer like, well, I want to regulate it. Just give me HBO Max and have them all come in directly, and that'll be fine. But then they'll start to, once they control the market, they'll charge more. News will become a problem, and so I wouldn't be comfortable leaving the entire Canadian market directly to the U.S. companies to fundamentally control. I do think there's real value in making sure there's a Canadian media company, whether it's part of a telco or separate, somewhat controlling and dictating and working with. They're just more open to as much as we, in all the regulation hearings, the broadcasters would say we want this, want that. But it will be different if you're just dealing with Amazon or Facebook or other companies directly. They would not be as willing, I think, to make the kind of changes that a Canadian media company would if required. It'll be more battles, it'll be more holdouts, it'll be uglier than working with a Rogers or a Bell or a Corus at the end of the day. And so there's this bigger concern, I think, that should be out there, that not just that, Corus as an independent company going away, independent companies going away aren't great, but losing the telcos and losing their media divisions aren't great either. It's not an either or. If you lost the complete system in the middle, I don't think that would fundamentally be good without a complete regulatory overhaul on how you're going to handle the very aggressive studios. Because that's the one thing I would say I noticed. I mean, working with the U.S. so much over the years, they are more aggressive, more unwilling, harder to move, bigger negotiators from that perspective. And to see that come directly in against a regulatory body like CRTC, I think is going to be challenging. It's not the same as working directly with a Canadian company.
The gloves are off. That's the comments I was hearing from Banff too, is that Americans who are attending were saying, we've seen this. It's ugly, but we didn't ever see it in Canada before. That it's brass knuckle time, and wow, here they're doing it north of the border. So certainly that's different. And who knows what's next? And as you're speculating a bit, I think Corus is in a very tight corner. Do you think? And it's not fair to ask you this, really. I mean, you're buddies with all these people, but poor Troy is in quite a corner that they could indeed be looking at some sort of bankruptcy protection or something. And
obviously I'm not in a position to speculate on that directly. But I will say, look, if there was a team that could right a ship, it's absolutely Troy and his team. And I mean, yes, I've worked for Troy, so ultimately you could say I'm a bit biased, but I would say that's there's only a couple people I have worked with in my entire career who I would say are truly, truly exceptional executives. And one of them, the most would be, you would know well, Barb Williams, who is I worked for years and is so amazing in so many different ways. I don't think the broadcast industry would have an executive like that.
I agree.
Again,
yeah.
she's that amazing.
And she must be. She must be thrilled, Daniel, that she doesn't like a lot of this is her hands are washed of all this stuff. At CBC, she's got other problems, but she doesn't have to worry about renegotiating with, Warner's Discovery, does she?
No, I wouldn't. But I would say the great thing about Barb was she always cared about what was best for the Canadian broadcasting industry, and anything that happens that makes it worse, I know she wouldn't feel good about. She, she's been a champion for Canadian, for production, for as long as I've known her. She's been, she continues to be, and I say CBC is lucky to have her. She's that great, but she continued to be a champion, and I think she would love just to see, a continued strong Canadian presence in this marketplace. And as I was saying, if there's an executive that might be able to find a way through to put the very small, narrow win that might come out of this, it's going to be Troy and his team.
Mm-hmm.
But challenges for sure.
Yeah, we'll watch closely. Now, are you, Daniel? Do you consult on these issues with people? What is your business now?
I decided I'd done that for 20 years, and as you've heard me speak a little bit about the challenges, for me, just personally, it was becoming a 24/7 day job. Which was challenging for me. Like I said, constant renewals, constant negotiations, and I needed a year to step back from all of this for a little bit.
Good for you, yeah.
Because it was stressful. It's funny because people who know me have seen me a year later, and they're like, "Oh my God, you look great and healthy." It's like I literally dropped 60 pounds in 12 months.
Wow.
And I don't think that was like exercise, because that's not me. I'm too busy watching TV. That was just stepping away from the stress, because it's a very hard, very stressful market trying to run these kind of businesses now. And for me, I just wanted to step back and take a break. And I'd like to, going forward, look at, I think regulation is still going to be hugely important, and I would love to have a role in helping set this stuff right and move at a speed that would really ensure that Canada remains strong with its voice around entertainment and news in this marketplace, because there's a fundamental, real risk that that's not going to be the case.
Well, two things. I mean, I think there should be a Daniel Eves channel, so that it's like, you're looking to lose 60 pounds and have a whole new life. I can tell you how to do it.
Yeah, you just have to walk away from your job for a year.
I'd watch that. I think that'd be pretty awesome. A lot of people would. The other is policy. You'd be very valued. It's the government's going to have to sort out some stuff. That doesn't often happen quickly or quickly enough. They need some smart people in Ottawa to pull the pieces together. Is that something you might consider getting involved in?
Yeah, actually, I would. I gave it, I've been on the private side for so many years. As I've stepped back and sort of spent this year watching things happen and talking with people, I realized that, if I wanted to sort of cap off the career I had, it would maybe to be help in policy to really help set things up for long term versus, getting one more deal done for 2 more years for one more brand, that if I could step back and really help shape some policy and help in some way, especially with the insights I've had over the years. Yeah, absolutely. It's something I would love to be doing.
It sometimes helps. My business was writing about television for newspapers, and it took the collapse of the newspaper industries that I could sort of, exhale and look around and do other things, right? Sometimes you never know, out of the ashes arise some great opportunities.
Yeah, exactly.
Daniel, I really appreciate this. I'm, this isn't my strength, all these regulations and deals. It's a whole tangled, it's just, I'm so thankful for your explanation and expertise here, and best of luck with everything. And thank you very, very much for taking the time today.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to thank Daniel Eves for reaching out when the news broke and volunteering to sort it all out on this podcast. I'm very much indebted to you, Daniel. Thanks as always to the guy who straightens everything out here every episode on Brio TV. our own specialty brand producer, Phil Hong. Give it up for those crispy critters, BJ Del Conte and Paul Boudra and friends, who teamed with piano man Steve Dudley and performed the music you hear on these episodes. Finally, thanks to you, listener. If you enjoy this episode, please click on a rating or leave a comment wherever you listen to these conversations. I'm Bill Brio. Thanks for listening.